I played Wit at Brandon Sanderson's 2024 Worldhopper ball. People had a lot of questions about the whole experience, and as for why you're here, I assume it's because you like watching really long videos about really niche topics, or you're just a massive Sander fan. Also, if your username is Bros92, I've got great news. You're about to get your wish. Welcome to Wit Tells All, the Worldhopper Ball.
I will not go, turn the lights off, carry me home.
First, a few establishing things to help give you all an idea of how all of this went. Dragonsteel hired a company called Paladin to throw the Worldhopper ball. Paladin does have a wild resume, having thrown parties for big names and companies like Billie Eilish, Bethesda, Epic Games. So how did I get the gig? I got the gig the same way all but one person got the gig. I applied. I reached out to Dragonsteel after Brandon announced that there would be actors at the ball, and there was only really one character in Stormlight that I had any business in playing, given both their physical characteristics and personality. So I told them that if they planned on having someone play Wit, I would be happy to do it. I felt like I was uniquely suited to the role because I had spent the last year of my life roasting authors in ways that didn't make them hate me afterward.
I wonder if brutally murdering an interviewer would work.
They asked me to submit a resume and a clip of me doing a segment of Wit's Oathbringer roast. As for my resume, I actually did have some acting experience. I took 4 years of theater in high school, and my senior year, I played the lead role of George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. I was in my high school's improv club during my junior year as well, so I had some hands-on experience with that and knew some of the basic rules of improv. I've read all of Sanderson's Cosmere books, which I think was important because Wit would be a really tricky character for someone who knows nothing about the books to play, because he knows a lot about everything in the Cosmere because he shows up just about everywhere in the Cosmere. I didn't mention this in the resume itself, but I think I'm pretty good at voices, especially mimicking them and learning accents, that sort of thing. When I played George Bailey in high school, I did the whole fake New England accent that Jimmy Stewart did in the movies. People said it was good, but it was also high school theater, so how good could it have really been? Lastly, and this is going to come as a real shock to many of you, so sit down if you're watching this video standing up for some weird reason. I've always been a bit of a class clown. Made Between the Pages asked how it felt to play myself, and she kind of hit the nail on the head. I was still playing the part of Wit, but I had fundamental parts of my personality that I could pull from and lean on for the role. Early on in life, I figured out that if you say things and people laugh at them, then it makes the chemicals in your brain go burr. This chemical addiction is the foundation of my comedy. Tell a good joke, people laugh. Tell a bad joke, cry yourself to sleep thinking about it every night for the rest of your life. The stakes were high, everything you said was a gamble, and I lived for it. Like any other skill, comedy is a lot of practice and trial and error, but I think that there's one other core component to my particular brand of humor that's pretty important here. I have always had an overabundance of empathy. When other people are upset, I get upset. When other people are happy, I'm happy. This might be the fundamental personality trait that led me down the path of being the class clown. A selfish desire to make other people laugh to bring myself joy. But I think it's that overabundance of empathy that actually made me good at comedy over time. I never ever want to actually hurt someone's feelings for laughs. Failure is an excellent teacher. I definitely hurt people's feelings at times in school, and those are all data points that helped me to become a better comedian. You apologize, you learn from it, and you do better. I think comedy is inherently empathetic. You have to understand people, human nature, your audience, and the way that they feel. As soon as something crosses the line, it's not funny anymore. My goal with my humor is to always keep my big toe over the line. Push my luck just a little to keep things interesting, but not so much that anyone ever gets hurt. How did it all happen? In July 2024, I reached out to Dragonsteel, and in very early October, they asked me to get on a call. I think so Paladin could have a better sense of me as a person. Afterwards, they asked me to submit the resume, fill out the questionnaire, and submit a clip of me playing Wit. In late October 2024, they offered me the role and sent over the contracts. Gliding Angel asked me multiple questions that I'll get to, but this is a good time to answer number 4. From the start, Paladin and Dragonsteel wanted Wit to be insulting people as they entered the ball. Best role ever. But on the actor behavior boilerplate contract that Paladin sent over to me, it said that I wasn't allowed to be disrespectful to guests or my fellow actors. I broached the topic with Paladin, telling them that I wasn't really comfortable signing a contract that I could easily violate as part of the role that I'm being paid to portray. Thankfully, they found this oversight as funny as I did, and we tweaked it so that I couldn't get sued into the ground if I upset a guest or something. With the contract signed, there was one thing left to do. Panic. It was the beginning of November, and I had exactly 1 month to prepare for this role. I had to memorize my lines, master the voice I was going to do, prep some material to insult guests with, and, of course, refresh myself on all things Wit and Cosmere. So how did I prepare to portray Wit? We're going to tackle this in the order that I tackled things too. First things first, I had to memorize my lines and nail the voice. I knew the voice would be a make or break for this whole thing. Thankfully, as we talked about earlier, I'm generally pretty good at voices. I think. I tackled the Worldhopper ball the same way that the Greeks infiltrated Troy during the Trojan War. Brute force and a big-ass horse. A lot of Broadway actors will write out their lines phonetically and memorize the sounds rather than the words themselves. This way it's more like muscle memory than it is actually memorizing lines. I'm not a Broadway actor, so I didn't do that. I read my lines over and over and over. I practiced and practiced and practiced. I recorded them and put them on my phone so that when I walked my 2 beautiful, handsome pugs each morning and evening, I could hear myself saying the lines perfectly in Wit's voice and practice in tandem with me so that I could immediately correct myself if I got something wrong. Pretty straightforward. The voice was my next major concern. If my fellow Cosmere fans hated the voice, it would be so much harder to show them a good time. So, as an avid audiobook listener, I went straight to the source. I reached out to Michael Kramer to ask for tips on playing Hoid. If whoever plays Wit for Hollywood does their research and doesn't want to bug Michael, here's what he told me. Briefly, when narrating the character, give your inner smartass free rein. Light, quick articulation, which tends to lead to higher-pitched, very clean articulation. His jibes are not mean-spirited. He sees one's strivings and can appreciate them for their good intentions, while at the same time noting the ridiculous things we value which hold us back. For example, if the goal is to reach the other side of the wall, yes, bludgeoning your way through is one way to attain it, especially if you feel your head did not already have enough lumps and bumps, but walking around the wall might be less painful. I can't tell you how many times I read that email. There's one aspect of Wit's voice that Michael didn't mention that I personally think of with regards to the character. When Wit speaks, he has this very crisp, clean articulation, especially of consonants, but when I did the character, I tended to draw out his vowels a bit. This aspect gave me a blueprint for every sentence and word that I spoke. Crisp, clean consonants with drawn out vowels. When you're learning how to do a voice, it's really nice to have a blueprint like this you can fall back on. Audiobook narrators and actors, they get to say their lines. They can practice the words they want to say and get every sentence's cadence down perfectly. But once you add improv to the mix, well, now things are getting tricky. When you're doing improv, especially improv that involves interacting with an audience, you're going to say a few words that you don't know how to say in character yet. For me, at least, if I say a word wrong or fumble a pronunciation, it can sort of break the spell of the voice that I'm doing and may lead me to slip into a different voice or accent entirely. Having this blueprint for how to say every word helped to make me more consistent, and for bonus points, drawing out all the vowels made my jest sting a little bit more and made me sound more obnoxious. And if wit is one thing, it's obnoxious. I practiced the voice like crazy with this blueprint, sent over a clip for Michael to review, and he said, one thing that was really funny about this event is I had people coming up in droves to tell me that I had nailed the voice and I must have listened to the Michael Kramer books a ton. In almost equal number, I had people coming up to me and asking if I had listened to the graphic audio versions of the audiobooks because apparently I sounded just like that narrator when he does Wit's voice too. I think this is one of those things that actually speaks most to Brandon's talent as a writer. He's written a character who is so vivid on the page that the performance really does just become easy in a way. Wit is Wit. I talked like Wit, I acted like Wit. The clarity of the character made all of this so much easier. With the lines and the voice nailed down, it was time to move on to the next most important thing. No, not the jokes. I felt comfortable enough that I could figure those out on the fly if I had to. No, there would be guests attending from across the Cosmere that I needed to be able to recognize and have relevant interactions with, and that meant it was time for a refresh. I read Wit's Coppermine page about 1,000,000 times. I memorized all his other names because I knew you nerds would try to pull one over on me. I can't tell you how many people called me Cephandrius, and you know what I said to them? Yes, you may call me Cephandrius, Hoid, Roamer, Dust, Topaz, Drifter, Wanderer, Lunu Anaki, Cephandrius Max Tori, Imperial Fool of the Rose Empire, Midius Whitehair, Bearer of the First Gem, Mythwalker, and above all, Wit. Yeah, I memorized that, along with 36 other responses I prepped for common questions and interactions that I anticipated. I read Wit's Coppermine, I reread summaries of all the Stormlight books, I watched every lore and summary video about Stormlight that I could get my hands on to make sure that I'd be comfortable in any situation. Obviously, I didn't have time to reread a bunch of books. I have a day job, people. But I did listen to Tress after I listened to my lines, or after I memorized my lines, since along with Yumi, that book had the most Hoid lines and interactions in it, especially since he's the one telling the stories. There was one other book that I did reread several times, though. The Book of Wit. Thank you, Internet. You always come through. Some lovely person out there had compiled all of Wit's interactions, lines, and scenes he was present for in the books into a Google Doc. It wasn't totally up to date. I think it stopped after Oathbringer, but it was enough to make my life 1,000,000 times easier. Thank you, Internet stranger. Your contribution was appreciated. Once I felt comfortably refreshed with the source material, I moved on to what might be the most important aspect of the whole performance: insults. Now, this may come as a shock to you. It really came as a shock to me. But I actually wasn't given a whole lot of direction when it came to insulting people. The script and official language used behind the scenes from Paladin and Dragonsteel was that Wit would be kindly insulting people. But I think it boils down to this. I think Paladin and Dragonsteel trusted me. I think they had a good sense of me as a person. I don't think they felt like they had to fret over what I'd say to people. They knew my character. Like, as a person, they knew my character. They knew I understood the character I was playing, and they knew that I sought to do no harm above all. So, how does one kindly insult people? The one thing that I had zero intention of doing is ruining someone's night. At the same time, I had my work cut out for me. The people attending the ball are some of the biggest fans of the Cosmere. They've read and reread the books. They know and love these characters. They listen to lore podcasts and post memes on Reddit. My suspicion was that most people would actually want to be roasted by Wit. So it was up to me to do it in a way that fit the character without risking actually hurting people's feelings. So I established a few rules for myself. First, anything Wit said in the books is on the table. I memorized lines he said to characters entering the party in Way of Kings and a bunch of others, including, of course, the entire roast from the end of Oathbringer. The only line I didn't utilize at the ball was the bit where he called Sadeas cancerous anal discharge, because some things should be reserved for Sadeas and Sadeas only. Second, easy on the cursing. Cursing is an excellent tool in a comedian's toolbox, but this was a wedding, for crying out loud. So I generally avoided cursing, with the exceptions of some in-world curses like storming and rusting, and allowed myself to the other relatively harmless curses that you might hear Shrek say, like damnation. Third, for the most part, I restricted myself to jokes on the following: stupid, stinky, ugly, and choices. We'll talk about that last one in a second. My attitude is that at one point or another, everyone is a little bit stupid, ugly, or stinky. They are some of the most common insults that you'll see in any Disney movie, children's playground, or stand-up comedy act. If everyone is stupid, ugly, or stinky at some point or another, then no one could be upset with me for calling them stupid, ugly, or stinky. Roasts and insults do have some aspect that makes them stand out as personal, or they aren't funny. But one of my fundamental rules for teasing or joking with people that I don't know very well is that you generally don't make fun of things that people can't help. I'm not talking about being ugly. I'm talking about specific features that people can't help that are common insecurities. Big noses, imperfect teeth, a person's weight. If you're attending a roast, those things are on the table. If you're going to a wedding and there's some immortal weirdo at the entrance making fun of people, it's probably off the table. There are two caveats to this rule. The first one being baldness. Most people can't help being bald, but being bald is funny. And if you're a bald guy, you have two choices. You can either embrace that being bald is funny, or you can lift weights and get so jacked that no one would ever dare to make fun of you. Well, unless you attend a Worldhopper ball, wit will still make fun of you. The second caveat to this rule is being old. We all get old. Just like being stupid, stinky, and ugly, everyone ages. Old people generally know they're old, and pro tip, women especially love being told they're old.
Meeting Wit, which was the first character you saw coming in, went a little like this.
It's him! All of the inspirational stories that he's told to.
It's rude to point, ma'am, and also why you wearing a crown if you're not as pretty as possible.
Oh, my sweet summer child.
Perhaps a queen with all those wrinkles on your face. You're very welcome. I will thank you once you're out of my sight.
Never meet your heroes. I saw people online saying that they wished he'd roasted them harder, so people loved it.
So the last one that I mentioned is choices. If someone has chosen to style their hair a certain way, dye their hair a certain way, or wear a bold outfit, those are things they can help. They chose that. It won't be an insecurity for them, so it should be safe and on the table for the average person. So, to review, the rules I set for myself are that I can call people stupid, ugly, stinky, bald, old, or make fun of the choices they've made. I did break these rules a handful of times, but I'll talk about them more in the interactions part of the video a bit later. Just like with the voice, these rules gave me a blueprint to follow that ensured the guests got the wit experience they sought without things accidentally going too far. The only people who would be genuinely hurt by being called stupid or ugly or stinky are only children. Like being an only child, not children. Children weren't allowed at the ball. So only children, in which case this would have been a healthy growing experience for them. I think that answers how I got away with the insults without being hurt. I wasn't super stressed about creating insults on the fly. The wits from the book are super tailored and they're oftentimes very clever. Like some of Wit's lines in the books are the kind where you don't realize how bad you were roasted until you're laying in bed that night. My attitude was that it was best to ensure people got what they expected in the moment. When you're reading a book, you can reread a line and really enjoy the nuances of the joke. In real life, you can only deliver a joke once, and I have hundreds of people to insult as they enter. So while many of my jokes weren't quite as tailored, personal, or clever, I think it made for a better experience overall. Based on the insane number of compliments, emails, comments, DMs, and people approaching me at the ball and the convention, I think the insults were very well received and enjoyed for the most part. Again, there might have been some disgruntled only children in there somewhere. Like I said, no vetting process. It was all by me. Nope, not a once, because I felt very comfortable in the ways I was roasting people. I felt that only a sensitive person, aka an only child, would have really gotten their feelings hurt. It was also nice because people did sort of opt in to an extent. If you were walking into the ball, you were fair game for wit. But there were folks who spotted me quickly and either veered off to the right to avoid me, in which case I left them alone because the point is for them to have fun, not for everyone to get roasted. Or sometimes people would be eyes down and sprint past me, in which case I usually left them alone. Besides the occasional, "Oh yes, better hurry. Everyone loves wind and truth, but nobody likes wit and truth." I'm also a very competitive person, and I thought of being in character as a competition. I refused to lose. More on this in the guest interaction section of the video. As for my appearance, I know, my luscious, beautiful hair, what happened? Wigs are expensive, and wigs are very hot and unpleasant to wear for long periods of time under bright lights, so Paladin told me a week or two before the ball that they planned on spraying it with washable hair dye before each performance. That sounded like my idea of hell. Think about it. Assuming the black didn't sweat out of my hair and run down my face during the show or dance portion of the ball, I'd have to wash my hair really well each night when I got back to the hotel in order to avoid ruining their pillows. Not to mention, I would already have to take the time to get my makeup off at the end of every day, so I told them don't worry about it. I went to Ulta, paid them to dye my hair and eyebrows black, and that was well worth it for me to get more sleep each night and look my best during the shows. I also bought contacts to wear, these normal ones that I'm wearing, not colored ones, because I have beautiful baby blues. It was insane the difference that contacts, black hair, and straightening my hair made. I saw people I have known for years who didn't recognize me, even with my voice. Until I said my name, I saw friends who I thought knew I was Wit, who I had extended conversations with as Wit, who messaged me like 2 weeks later saying, "Holy crap, that was you?" Look, all I'm saying is, if you were arrested in the 1800s after committing a crime based on the image of a wanted poster, then you're an idiot. Like, these are two different people. As far as input from Brandon goes, unfortunately, the get into character excuse was not effective for getting backstory on Wit. And even if it was, NDAs are scary. I've had a lot of people assume that I worked directly with Brandon on the portrayal. Guys, Brandon has better things to do. While it would have been a ton of fun to get direction from Brandon himself, it's not something I ever expected. The less time that he has to spend on stuff like that, the faster he can write Secret Project number 6. So, I pre-wrote material, memorized jokes, all that good stuff to memorize the amount of improv and things that could go wrong. But you can't ever plan for everything. The role involved a lot of improv, from interacting with guests, to taking pictures, to dancing with the crowd. I had some experience doing improv in high school. I watched a lot of improv shows like Game Changer on Dropout leading up to this, but not to sound too full of myself, this is one of those natural things that I'm good at. Once I got into the flow of Wit's voice for the evening and the guests started coming in, the spirit of Wit took over my body. I didn't have to think or hesitate. All that research from scouring the Coppermind and the lore videos and everything else was the foundation that let me just run with this. Especially the character himself. I have to give credit to Brandon here. Like I said earlier in the video, Brandon wrote a character that is vivid and jumps off the page.
The illustrious Yasna, everyone!
One of the most shocking things for me when I was spending the month of November just cramming my head full of Wit was that he doesn't really have that many lines compared to a lot of the characters. Brandon has even said before that Wit is one of the hardest characters for him to write. As a character, about 50% of the time he's being obnoxious or witty or gestury, and 50% of the time he's waxing about art and philosophy and the nature of life. You don't normally see the comedy relief character also be one of the most well-informed, mysterious, powerful, influential, and philosophical people in a book. I think that's part of what makes Wit so interesting and what has made the fandom fall in love with him. He doesn't have to spend a lot of time on the page, at least not right now. Half the fun at this stage in the Cosmere is having zero clue what Wit is on about or up to. If we understood Wit's intentions perfectly, and to be clear, we do have some ideas and theories about his goals and whatnot, then I think Wit would just be a less interesting character and the Cosmere as a whole loses just a little bit of its magic. Wit has been alive for thousands of years, so we'll never see his entire history. But I do think the book Dragonsteel will be a somewhat tricky one to write, because Brandon will, in some ways, be pulling back the curtain on Wit. Anything the audience can imagine or wonder about is usually going to be more wondrous, nebulous, and fantastical than the reality that comes out on the page. It's just the nature of human knowledge. A book that's all about Wit's backstory has to be a good story, teach us about Wit, but still keep that sense of wonder and mystery to him. All that being said, I didn't have to worry so much about the artsy/philosophical side of Wit, besides one exception that I'll talk about in a minute. But he was at a wedding, so he wanted to have fun. Mr. Binky had asked how I developed his mannerisms and actions to play the character, and really, Paladin gets a lot of credit for me being able to do this role, as well as people tell me that I did this role. I didn't practice his mannerisms and actions nearly as much as his voice. I knew those things would kind of click into place for me when I got there and was in costume, and that I could adjust that stuff on the fly. I couldn't adjust what I'd memorized or prepped for on the fly. I say Paladin gets credit here because they really did trust me and turn me loose with the character. At first, I was very cautious about suggesting anything to them for the production. I didn't know them that well and wasn't sure how it would come off. Some people like collaboration on something like this, but other people might have felt that I was stepping on toes by making suggestions or something like that. But Paladin really gave not just me, but the entire cast the freedom and creative space to fulfill their visions for the characters that they were playing. After all, the cast were all pretty much Cosmere fans. We'd all read the books. We all knew what the goal was here. For instance, when I suggested for a line to be changed, Paladin was very open about it and would go ask Dragonsteel for permission to do it. The main line that comes to mind is originally when I introduced Brandon for his speeches, it was a little boring for Wit. It was something like, "And now there's someone else who would like to say a few words." I thought it would be a little more Wit-like, sort of venturing into the meta territory that Wit does from time to time, to introduce Brandon by saying, "And now there's someone here who's been like a father to me who wanted to say a few words." I felt it was a fun little joke for fans who knew that Wit was one of Brandon's first characters, a tabletop RPG character named Topaz who found his way into the books that Brandon read. I think Wit would think of authors as a sort of a parent to their characters, so it felt appropriate. Paladin liked the idea, and Dragonsteel approved it. So the ball definitely had a lot of collaborative elements to it behind the scenes that I've really enjoyed. One of the biggest things about Wit's character is that he really just does whatever he wants. He likes to entertain himself above all else, and that's sort of what makes him so obnoxious. He doesn't really care if you're in on the joke. He's not doing it for you. He's doing it for him. Paladin ended up kind of giving me the reins and told me to do what Wit would do. Not having a bunch of finite rules and restrictions put on me about things I was allowed to do or say made my job improvising a million times easier. So when it came to his mannerisms, his actions, how he'd act at any given time, I fell back to WWWW. What would Wit Woo? The free rein I was given to improv, combined with Wit's role as the MC of the event, really gave me the ability to make the shows go more smoothly. During the very first show we did, there were some technical difficulties. Since I hadn't really been given any instruction on such cases, I sort of just sat there, which is my biggest regret about the first show of the Worldhopper Ball. Afterwards, I asked Brandon Finn, who is the CEO of Paladin, if it'd be okay to improv a bit during the show, during moments like that, and he was like, "Dude, of course. I want you to do whatever Wit would do in any given moment, especially if it helps the show run more smoothly." Well, all bets were off after that. For the rest of the shows, if anything went wrong, even for a half awkward second, I could jump in, be obnoxious Wit to make everyone laugh, and then the show could continue onwards. It's hard to remember all the examples because even though everyone did an amazing job, there's a million factors in play at every show, and things are always bound to go wrong a little bit here and there, even on Broadway. I'm not saying I'm the only reason why the rest of the shows went better than the first show did. There's a million variables at play here. Everybody got better with every show. But feedback that Brandon Finn passed on to me after the first night was that whenever I jumped into improv during the show, people just assumed it was part of the show. People stopped being able to identify the mistakes we made because I had the freedom to just be obnoxious Wit. Having a character like Wit at an event like this, who everyone expects to make jokes, be a little meta, etc., is such an asset. It makes it easy to solve most every problem on the spot. One of the best examples that springs to mind is that there was a show where Bridge 4 came out to do their kata. They all got in position, ready for the music, and then nothing. No music. An entire room of people just staring at these actors who are waiting for their cue. They're disciplined warriors. There's nothing they can do. Dalinar would look like a jerk if he stood up and commanded there to be music or something, so given I had free rein to be Wit without fear of stepping on toes or ruining the production, I yelled something like, "Well, this is awkward," after the silence stretched on for just a bit too long. The audience laughed, and a moment later, the music started. The show was uniquely challenging compared to a regular theater production because, in addition to the improv aspect, we kept having to add new lines for Wit during the show. Without a character like Wit, you'd have Adolin or someone address the crowd and say, "Please do not bring your drinks to the dance floor. People could slip and fall." That doesn't feel like a party. That doesn't feel like an in-world experience. So anytime something like that had to happen, you know what character could say literally anything as rudely as you can imagine and have people love it? Wit. Ladies and gentlemen, please refrain from bringing your drinks to the dance floor. It would be such a shame if there was a spill that led to Kaladin slipping, falling, and getting something new to cry about. So we were constantly tweaking lines or adding announcements that had to be delivered at a moment's notice. And Wit, the character, not me, the actor, made that extraordinarily easy to handle for me, the actor. Wit, the character, made it easier for me, the actor. Does that make sense? The ball itself went like this. People came inside while Wit roasted them. About a half hour later, things would kick off with the scripted portion of the show. People got food and drinks and mingled. Characters gave speeches, congratulating Adolin and Shallan on their wedding.
But you mustn't try to right yourselves alone. Reinforce one another, and, like an alloy unified by the Almighty, you will be for yourselves, and, eventually, two will be one. Certain destruction becomes harmony. Believe me, it's happened before.
And then there were some performances. Adolin and Shallan did a beautiful dance they choreographed together. Adolin and Kaladin did a duel they choreographed together. Bridge 4 had a spear kata they choreographed and performed. And then there were Spren aerialists, who were easily the most talented people in the room at any given time. They did the most incredible acrobatics suspended in the air on ribbons. I don't know if you can see, but I literally have chills remembering this. Like, they were amazing. And trust me, I tried out the ribbons. It's just as hard as it looks. These young women were unbelievable. Which, this is a beautiful segue to talking about Wit diverging from his typical obnoxious self. The only time during the Worldhopper ball that my behavior got into the philosophical Wit area was during displays of art. In my head, Wit sort of rolled his eyes at Kaladin and Adolin's silly little duel. Similarly, he at first thought of Bridge 4's performance as boring, waving their silly little spears around, but the more he watched, the more he thought of their performance as art. Last came the Spren, and by this point, Wit was in full philosophical waxing mode. He watched them, thinking about the implications of the Knights Radiant returning, what it meant for the larger Cosmere, and ultimately shoved those thoughts out of his head and just tried to appreciate their performance for the art it was and be in the moment. This made it all the worse when a certain uninvited guest showed up at the wedding. This next part has some slight spoilers for Wind and Truth relating to Shallan's parentage, so I'll have a timestamp somewhere on screen letting you know where to skip to avoid being spoiled, because I'm about to talk about it quite candidly. After the Spren exit, Shallan spots someone in the audience that Wit recognizes as well, and he's not happy about it. Before the mystery guest can reach Shallan, Wit rushes across the stage, takes the woman by the arm, admonishing her and calling her a storming madwoman, talking about how she should not be here on Shallan's wedding day. In later shows, I wound up adding the line, "Why don't you go back to Braze and stay there for a while this time?" Which led to lots of gasps and excited chatter from the audience. Wit leads the character to the perpendicularity, and she goes off into Shadesmar. If you've read the books, you'll know this confirmed a long-time theory from fans about the truth of who Shallan's mother really is, that Shallan's mother is the Herald Chana. During the first show, I didn't say the Braze line. We thought that people would enjoy the mystery for much longer. The only problem was Wit wound up answering "who was that?" a dozen or two times afterward, which meant less time for other people to get pictures or interact with Wit. While I wanted to make every interaction fun and special, there were a lot of people there and just not enough time for extended conversations. So in future shows, I tweaked the line to make her identity more obvious, and that led to much fewer questions. After this, the rest of the show was a dance party on the main floor while guests could get pictures and interact with the cast on the sides. My favorite reactions that people had were just making people laugh and seeing them have a good time, which, thankfully, was the vast majority of the interactions. To my knowledge, I didn't actually upset anyone. Well, actually, there was one guy whose wife was a huge fan, and he hadn't read the books. So I think he was a little taken aback when I called him and his wife ugly, but his wife's laugh, gave him pause from, I guess, coming over and clocking me. They walked off as she happily, explained that was just Wit, and, you shouldn't pay him any mind. I'm very pleased to say that I did indeed get to roast Brando Sando a bit here and there. There was a night or two where he came to the ball, and since Wit was sort of the MC for the event, it was up to me to introduce Brandon and to keep things moving after his speech. Since there weren't specific lines written for after his speech, I would just improv. I believe after one of his speeches, I said something like, "That was terrible." And then everyone laughed. And I said, "Let's hope that guy never tries to tell a story." And then everyone laughed again. And then from somewhere in the audience, Brandon yells, "Cut it out, or I'll do terrible things to you." And everybody laughed. And I think I did like a little like ooh and an eye roll or something like that. So, ton of fun. All the improv and ton of fun. I saw a lot of ghostbloods who all eagerly tried to give me ghostblood stickers, tattoos, that sort of thing. Plenty of folks came up to me and said things like, "The Lord of Scars sends his regards," which was hysterical every time. While I accepted like stickers and trinkets and little things from guests that were like Cosmere related, I would refuse the ghostblood paraphernalia every time, which I think hurt some people's feelings initially until they realized why, and then I'd roll my eyes and say something like, "You tell Kelsier that I have no qualms with returning to rough him up again," or something like that. That usually got big smiles, and that made me happy. I really loved the harsher wit crowd too. These folks are the other place that I intended to break my other rules about what I'm allowed to make fun of. If people didn't want to be roasted in any way, they'd avoid me. Easy peasy. If people did, however, well, they sought me out. After their quick little roast as they entered, some people would say, "Is that all you got?" And the real fans would say, "Harsher wit." And I gave it to them. Oh, I gave it to them every time. You have to remember, I sunk literal days worth of time into preparing for this. I was not going to be outdone by a harsher wit or by someone who thought that they could outwit wit with a retort or roast of their own. I had upwards of 30 in-universe jokes prepared, along with the Oathbringer roast, general witty roasts and jokes from our world, and my own improv skills. If someone came up to me and said harsher wit or tried to roast me back, all bets were off, and it was game on. Unfortunately for these folks, I was Illidan Stormrage, and they were not prepared. If you said harsher wit, I'd roast you a little harder. If you said it again, I'd go a little harder. Each one would get more and more personal or closer to the cancerous anal discharge end of the spectrum, and I'd just keep going until the harsher wit stopped. If people wanted to be roasted, if they wanted a proper witty roast, who was I to keep them from a good time? The people who were only children could hardly get upset with me for giving them what they asked for. You mess around, you find out. In the end, all these folks had great senses of humor and were complete and total joys to interact with. While we're talking about exceptions, a big exception is going to be if someone literally asks for it. I said earlier that I didn't make fun of people for physical characteristics that they couldn't help, so when I ran into a gentleman at the con that day who knew I was playing wit that evening, he asked me to not hold back and let the disabled jokes fly. Billy, true to my promise, when the gentleman emerged from Shadesmar, I said something to the abject horror of everyone around me, including the Dragonsteel and Paladin staff within earshot, who surely thought that I'd been fairly well behaved up until this point. "Yes, roll right this way, sir. We have a cripple corner in the back. We can put you in so that you won't be a tripping hazard. Shall I inform the other guests that you accept free lap dances? There's a lot of charitable people in attendance tonight who love helping out those who can't stand on their own 2 feet. There was a ton of unique and fun fan encounters. There was a woman who came in wearing a giant ball gown, and that was so much fun, giving her grief about how she's the only one who matters, how it doesn't matter if she's in anyone's way because it might as well be her wedding, etc., etc. There were the dudes dressed as chickens. They were great. I could really go on, and I remember a lot of them pretty vividly, but this video is probably long enough without me delving into them all, so I'll just talk about 2 that really stuck with me. First, after sending the mystery guests back through Shadesmar one night, I was making my way back to the stage and saw Ren from Corridor Crew. Way cool. I stopped and said hello to him and told them that I respected his work, seeing as he was one of the foremost light weavers in the Cosmere. Because if you don't know his thing, he does special effects and that sort of thing. It's great. Check out his stuff. This tickled him to no end. It was the most wholesome, fun interaction. He laughed and laughed and was like, dude, you know who I am? As if that was the craziest thing he'd ever heard, which is ridiculous. And then he said that he had so many nice things to say. He had so many nice things to say about like my performance and everything. He was very kind. I had to run back to get where I needed to be, but it was really cool. I followed his work for years, and I wound up spotting him at the convention later on and snagged a picture. He was a super cool guy. It was awesome. I fangirled a little bit. The second interaction I really loved was this girl I ran into on my way from the con to the ball one day. She stopped me with her mom and looked at me wide-eyed and asked, "Are you Wit?" I told her I was, and she teared up immediately and asked for a picture. And I was like, well, of course. Her mom snapped the picture, and afterwards she sort of straightened and fixed her shirt and said, "Okay, now will you roast me?" It was the sweetest thing ever. I talked to her mom later, and it turns out her daughter doesn't even read Sanderson. She has no idea who Wit is. She just liked me at the Worldhopper ball. It was beyond sweet. She wrote me a letter last month and made me a bracelet that said "My hero." I sent her a letter back with signed pictures of us and some goodies. She was awesome. Through all these interactions, I was steadfast that I would not break character. I referred to phones as fabrials, and even when all the really kind people came up to me to say nice things about the performance, even after the show, I'd say, "Yes, I know, I'm quite wonderful like that," or something equally obnoxious or infuriating. But if you were one of those people, please know that Jackson, the actor, really appreciated you. Comments like those are artistic fuel and only energized me for the rest of the night. I heard and appreciated all of you, even if Wit did not communicate the same appreciation. And I ended up having 3 people ask me out or give me their phone number. They were all very nice and polite, but I am married, which I couldn't tell them at the time because competitive. I think I just told them something about how Yasna wouldn't like that very much. I did bring the phone numbers home to give to my wife as proof that while Jackson may not have Riz anymore, Wit most certainly has Riz. I do want to talk about the rest of the cast really quick because they were awesome. I mentioned early on in the video that the cast was chosen through an application process except for one person, and that's Dalinar. Apparently they had a really hard time finding an actor who fit the bill for the role. The way they wound up finding this guy is Brandon Sanderson saw him. I can't remember if he was a guest at something or if he saw him somewhere in Salt Lake City and was like, "Hey, do you act?" So the guy who played Dalinar was handpicked by Brandon. His name was Cole Joy, and you've never met a more chill dude in your entire life. Kaladin was played by Cliff Weitzman, who was the CEO of Speechify. Backstage, the grind never stopped for this dude. He was answering emails and working hard nonstop. Mad respect. Navani was played by Kathy Ford, who is professional, talented, and downright pleasant to be around at all times. I think she's a school teacher by day, so like super cool that, you know, she does the acting stuff along with that. Adolin was played by Jackson Miller. Jackson is a TikTok star and an author working on his next book, which is an epic fantasy cultivation progression light Viking story about 2 brothers. Wex Lee played Yasna. We became instant besties, which made Wit bugging her throughout the ball like 10 times more fun. She also has a ton of cool credits under her belt, from games like Hogwarts Legacy to being a stunt woman to being featured in Devin Supertramp videos.
Check out this guy.
Savannah Carrasco played Shallan, and she has so much talent. Guys, she's 18 years old and she kicks so much ass at that ball. Right now, she does stage plays in Salt Lake City, but somebody needs to snap her up for Broadway or Hollywood or something, because good grief is she talented. I cannot wait to see the amazing art that she's going to go on to create. She was amazing, amazing, and a delightful human being. Bridge 4, the aerialists, the costume designers, and the rest of Paladin's team were all super incredible too. I'll put everyone's handles in the description so you can find them on Instagram. As for sleep, I slept about 3 to 5 hours most nights. The last show wrapped up at about 12 a.m. Each night, and it was up to Wit at that point to rudely tell everyone to leave each night.
Wonderful. If you want to hear it again, go listen to an audio. Now, I'm not sure if any of you have ever been to a wedding before, But generally when the bride and groom leave, so too is it time for the guests to go. So, ladies and gentlemen, get out now. That was very good. Sounds like we practiced that. Now that wasn't a joke, ladies and gentlemen. It is time to go.
I'd change after everyone was gone, socialize a bit with the cast and crew, walk back to my hotel, get my makeup off, shower, and crash by about 2 or 3 a.m. Because I was pretty busy with the ball for most of each day, I'd wake up a little bit early so I could see friends and that sort of thing for breakfast. Favorite insult is a tough one, and I think I'm going to hold off on answering this one for now. I had done all that work prepping for the roles and writing insults, and I wanted to find a way to use my evil roasting powers for good. So I reached out to Dragonsteel, who put me in touch with the Lightweaver Foundation, which is their charity effort. This year, I did a roast with Lightweaver where people could donate money to be roasted by Wit. There's a tier for an on-stage roast, off-stage roast, and a raffle held for a 10 or 15 minute long roast. My efforts wound up raising something to the tune of $7,000, which is pretty awesome. Anyway, that whole thing was actually filmed, and if it's not the cringiest thing in the entire world, because there's some very nerdy jokes in there, especially tailored to Cosmere fans, I'll edit it together and post it here. A big thank you to those who donated and participated in the roast. I've done a handful of roasts here and there for folks who have asked for them, and in exchange for donations to Lightweaver. That may be something I start back up again when I get some more time, but things have been so crazy lately I don't think I could get to them for a while, and they take a lot of time to do properly. I'd love to do more comedy for charity, so if that sounds fun, keep your eyes peeled. Funny behind the scenes story. I lost my voice after the first night, which isn't great for doing a lot of talking. The music was so loud that I was yelling to interact with guests during pictures, which I should have thought about at the time. Anyway, I was put on voice rest and given a steady supply of hot tea and honey, which is legitimately the only thing that kept me going. There was also a time where I was so tired that Emily Sanderson let me take a nap on Brandon Sanderson's hotel room couch, which was super sweet and is the only thing that got me through that day. It's actually kind of funny. I had a handler with me the entire time, since Wit was the only character who really had free reign to run off and do whatever he wanted, encouraged to interact with the crowd, a whole bunch, that sort of thing. They had to make sure that they could find me. So if you look at pictures or videos, you can probably see 1 or 2 sharp-dressed men lurking nearby to help me know if I needed to be somewhere, to bring me water because I was doing a lot of talking, to get me anything I needed or solve problems, just a jack of all trades. Both of those guys were amazing to work with, and I was very grateful to have them. My favorite moment of the entire experience was probably being lifted onto somebody's shoulders and having the crowd chant, "Wit, wit, wit, wit." That was the most surreal, cool thing ever. Something funny that I never expected was people asking me to sign things. The first time I was asked, I thought hard because this wasn't something that I prepared for, not in the least. But thankfully, I had the spirit of Wit inside me, compelling me, driving me forward. And I created a clever little signature for Wit on the spot. And that's how I wound up signing all the things as Wit. I find it hilarious that I don't have a fun signature for my author self, yet I have one for a fictional character that I played. And for the last question, Tim Hickson from Hello Future Me asked,
and there you have, when in Portugal, a delicious personalised GR omelette. How sad is that? Idiot.
Whew. And that was it, guys. That's the Worldhopper Ball. If you have any questions that I somehow did not cover in this way too long video, feel free to ask in the comments, and I'll answer anything that I'm legally allowed to, I guess. I'm very grateful to both Paladin and Dragonsteel for giving me the opportunity to have this experience and to portray such a beloved character. It is surreal to me that I am the first person to portray wit in live action. That's super cool. Anyway, if I don't end the video here, I'm just gonna end up like ranting about how much fun it was and how much I enjoyed the experience and the rest of the cast and that sort of thing for way too much longer. And I know Bros92 would probably love that, but I don't know, I got stuff to do. First and foremost, I have to edit this hour-long video, but they don't call it a tell-all for nothing, guys. They don't tell-all for nothing. How does Wit sign stuff off? How does he? Wit out. That's not the way. It doesn't feel appropriate to end a video of, you know, the guy who played Wit talking about the experience of playing Wit in the Worldhopper Ball without roasting all of you as well. Your face defies description, but only because it nauseated all the poets. You are what parents use to frighten children into obedience. I'd tell you to put a sack over your head, but poor sack. Theologians use you as proof that God exists, because such hideousness can only be intentional. Wit out.